All right, now we're going to look at different types of articles that you may encounter while doing research. So when you've done research for other classes, you've probably looked up articles and you've come across different types. Now the first one we're going to look at is an empirical study, and that's what we're going to use mostly in this class after this one, so we'll get more in depth into that in the next video. But for here, an empirical study has a method section that will describe the study. It will tell them what they're going to do. And as the little picture indicates here, there's often a question that you're trying to get an answer to. In this study, for example, here we see the method section, and here we have the study design. So they're going to describe what they did. And although these terms at this point in this section may not be ones you recognize, you will throughout the semester. But the important part is to recognize that this is describing an actual study they completed. We have participants were randomized into a group, assessments or questionnaires were given out at baseline and 3 times. So they're again describing what they actually did and that they conducted a study. And that's what you expect to find in an empirical article. Now you may have written a literature review for other classes, I hope you have, but there are articles that are just literature reviews themselves, and the method of those will describe what they reviewed. Alright, here we have another example. So here's another method section of a study, and this one uses a meta-analysis, which is one way of doing a literature review, one of the more common ways. And so it's saying the studies examined. So it's telling us that it's looking at different studies, and that's meaning different articles. And it's telling us how they decided what they were going to use. As we scroll down here, it's telling us we looked at both longitudinal and cross-sectional types of studies. And it then often will have a table of the studies included. These tables may look different, but here you can see these are the different articles that they actually reviewed. And all of these are going to be empirical articles that they reviewed to make this literature review or meta-analysis. So these are similar types of things you may do in a class when a teacher asks you to write an analysis or a literature review. So now on to theoretical articles. Now with these ones, there's no data. The point of a theoretical article is to expound theory. And in 129 and other classes, you may have heard about different theories. And those who write about those theories are writing what's called a theoretical article. And there generally is not a study that's been done. They're just examining. Here I have an example of a title, and often the word theory or framework or paradigm or perspective will often be in the title, so you can recognize it as such. Next we have methodological articles. These ones, like the theoretical article and the literature review, do not have a question exactly they're answering with a study. No one study is necessarily done. However, in a methodological article, there is more likely to have data because they're going to try to tell you how you should do something or some statistics of how to analyze something. So, for example, down here we have a methodological framework for crowdsourcing in research. So they're likely going to use a study or some things to say, this is how it's been done, this seems to be working, everybody should do it this way too. And that's kind of the goal of a methodological article, is to argue that there's a better way than what we've currently been doing for doing research or doing statistics. And then the last one we're going to talk about is case studies. And case studies is an actual study It may have data they've analyzed. Often it doesn't though, because it's so small. As this picture indicates, you take often a large sample and select 1, 2, maybe 3 people out, and then look really in depth at that individual person. And so you're describing in so much detail that you're not necessarily going to have a lot of numbers that you may see. But that isn't to say it's not really data. It's just more word-based data than number-based data. But these can be very useful in getting in depth at areas where either we don't have a large population or we have something we don't know a lot about, so we really want to get into it and know everything there is to know about it. An example I have is there was a student at Purdue who was interested in watching families interact at sporting events of their children. So a graduate student went to every single sporting event of an 11-year-old for a year and a half, and he was in 3 different sports. But this graduate student went to every single sporting event to watch how those parents interacted with the children at the sporting events. And that's a lot of detail to get in for one person. Now, you couldn't do that for 30 people and have the time. The advantage is he got a lot of really rich data about that kid. The drawback of a case study is that it's hard to generalize it to other groups because it was so narrow in scope. So they're really good to do, but they do have their drawbacks.